On a website, forms are used to gather information and requests from your users. So in this section, I'll go over how to build forms for your pages. I have a file we can use to get things started. In the Section 7 folder, I'll just open up the Forms sample HTML file in our browser. And we'll also open it up inside of our text editor too, so we can start working on it. Now, as you can see, we've got quite a few things we're going to be working on in this section. But the first thing I wanted to do is set up the basics that are required for just a simple form. Now, of course, we need a form tag to group everything together, and it should include all of our form elements. So I'll start it out here at the top, and then I'll close it at the end of our form content down here. The form tag needs to have two attributes set up in order for it to work correctly. The first one is the action attribute, and it defines where the form will be submitted, and in some cases, what will happen when it gets there. Most forms you create should go off to a specific script on the server side. For our lessons, we won't be able to replicate that here, so I'll just make up an address and we'll be able to at least see how the form sends out the data. Our fake address will be form submit. And notice I've made it a PHP file, which is a common script format to use on most servers. Many website host providers already have scripts set up on the server for you to use, so you'll just have to check with your host to see if some are available. There's also many other sites where you can download scripts to use, and then you'll just have to upload them to your server, and then set the address for the action correctly for wherever you put it. Now, the second attribute we need to use is method, and it tells the form how the data should be submitted. Generally, we'll be using one of two main method types. The first one is get, and the second one is post. Post is generally used when you want your data to be secure. And the get method is actually passive, so it puts all of the data up into the address when the send is made. For our example, we'll use get, and that way we can at least see how the data gets sent. When you pick out a script that you want to use, they'll usually tell you which method to use to send the data out, so make sure to look there. Well, now that we have our form set up, we now need some fields that our users can fill out. I'll set up some for the first two elements here, the first name and the email. For that, we'll use the input tag, which is our most basic form element. And each input tag also has two attributes that are required in order for it to work right. The first attribute is type, which says what kind of input we're making. And the most basic type is a text input. This will simply create a text field that our users can type into. The second attribute is the name, and it's how our form can tell each piece of data apart. Every input tag should be given a name attribute. For ours, since it's the first name, I'll just type in first name. And since this tag doesn't have any inputs, I'll use the self-closing slash at the end and finish out the tag. Now for our little form, we want to have two elements inputting, so I'll just copy our input that we made before and paste it underneath the email. I don't want to have two elements with the same name because our data could get confused, so I'll just rename this one email. And now we've got two inputs on our form for our users to fill out. Now the last thing a basic form needs is a way for the user to submit it. I'll go down to the bottom, right before our form closes, and I'll add in another input tag. This time we'll set the type attribute to submit. That will set up a button that our users can click and the form will be sent off. Since the submit button doesn't have any data attached to it, we don't need to have a name, but we do have another optional attribute that we can set, and that's value. On a text input form, the value is generally what the user types into the box. So if you want to preset a value, you can set it there too. For the submit button, the value is used to label the button that the user is going to click. So I'll just type in the word send, and that's what our button will say when the user sees it. Let's finish off this tag as well. And since we have all the basics needed for a form, let me save our changes, and let's go back out to our browser. We can see so far we only had the header and the text labels that were included at startup. But when I refresh, you can see that now we have two fields set beside the first two labels, and at the bottom you can see our send button set up there. These fields work just like you would expect. I can type in a name, I can hit Tab to move through the fields by default, and set up an email address. And then I can go ahead and hit send to submit it. Now, since the address we used in our action field was fake, of course the web page is not found. But if you go up here and look at the address bar, you can see that it tried to find our submit form, and since we used the get method, the data from our form is submitted right here after it. So if we had sent this to an actual PHP file, it would have gotten the data and been able to process it with whatever the script said it should do. So now that we've seen the basics of a form, in our next lesson we'll expand on that and we'll see what other types of elements you can create.